Rich man spots homeless girl coaching his chess champion child. What happened next shocked him. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay close and never miss a new story. The word checkmate should never sound triumphant when it comes from a homeless girl's lips, especially not when it's directed at your 11-year-old chess prodigy son. Alexander Reed's Italian leather shoes clicked against the wet pavement as he froze behind the oak tree, his breath forming small clouds in the morning mist. Through the park's gray haze, he watched his son Oliver, the boy who'd won 3 junior championships before his 12th birthday, sitting across from a young woman who looked like she'd crawled out of a dumpster. Her oversized hoodie hung like a tent over her thin frame. Holes gaped in her sneakers, exposing dirty socks. Greasy hair fell across her face in tangled curtains. But her eyes, those eyes were laser-focused on the worn wooden chessboard between them, calculating moves Alexander's expensive coaches would kill to understand. "Checkmate," she murmured again, a satisfied grin spreading across her dirt-smudged face. Oliver stared at the board, mouth open. Then he burst into delighted laughter, the kind of pure joy Alexander hadn't heard from his son in months. Alexander's chest tightened. This was wrong. All wrong. Oliver was supposed to be at tennis practice right now. The Riverside Country Club's courts were less than half a mile from here, where Alexander had personally arranged for Oliver to train with the city's most expensive instructor. Instead, his son was wasting time with some vagrant who probably learned chess from watching people play in subway stations. The girl was already resetting the pieces, her movements quick and confident. "Again?" she asked, and Oliver nodded eagerly. "You're incredible, Harper," Oliver said, his voice bright with admiration. "That sacrifice play, I never would have seen it coming." Harper. So she had a name. Alexander pulled his phone from his coat pocket and checked the time. 9:47 a.m. Oliver's tennis lesson had started 17 minutes ago. The instructor, a former Wimbledon qualifier who charged $300 an hour, was probably wondering where his star pupil had disappeared to. But Oliver seemed oblivious to everything except the chessboard. He moved a pawn, then looked up at Harper expectantly. She studied the position for maybe 3 seconds before sliding her knight forward. "See how that opens up the diagonal for my bishop?" she said softly. "Your king's going to be in trouble in 5 moves if you're not careful." Alexander's jaw clenched. Where had she learned to talk like that? To read positions like a master? He stepped closer, staying hidden behind the tree. The girl couldn't be much older than 18, maybe 19. Her clothes were clearly secondhand. The hoodie was at least 3 sizes too big, and her jeans were held together with safety pins. A battered backpack sat beside her on the bench, stuffed so full the zipper barely closed. But the way she moved those pieces, it was poetry. Oliver made his next move, and Harper shook her head. "You're thinking like your coaches again," she said. "All theory, no heart. Chess isn't just about memorizing openings and endgames. It's about seeing possibilities no one else can imagine." Alexander's blood ran cold. She knew about Oliver's coaches? "But my dad says," Oliver started. "Your dad wants you to be perfect," Harper interrupted gently. "But perfect is boring. Perfect is predictable. You want to be brilliant." She moved her queen with a flourish, and Oliver's eyes went wide. "Oh," he breathed. "I see it now." Alexander had heard enough. He stepped out from behind the tree, his shadow falling across the chessboard like a blade. Both Oliver and the girl looked up, startled. "Oliver," Alexander said, his voice carefully controlled. "What are you doing here?" His son's face went pale. "Dad, you were supposed to be at tennis practice." Alexander's eyes flicked to Harper, who was already sliding the chess pieces back into a small wooden box. 17 minutes ago. "I can explain." "Not here." Alexander's tone brooked no argument. "Get in the car." The black Mercedes was parked at the curb, engine running. James, Alexander's driver, stepped out and opened the rear door without being asked. Oliver stood slowly, his eyes darting between his father and Harper. "But we weren't finished." "Yes, you were." Alexander's voice was ice. "Get in the car. Now." Harper remained seated, clutching the chess set to her chest. She hadn't said a word since Alexander appeared, but her dark eyes tracked his every movement like a wary animal's. Oliver took a step toward the car, then stopped. "Harper, I'll see you tomorrow." "No," Alexander said sharply. "You won't." The girl's head snapped up at that. For a moment, her composure cracked, and Alexander saw something raw and desperate flash across her face. But then the mask slipped back into place, and she looked away. "It's okay, Oliver," she said quietly. "Your dad's right. You should go." Oliver's face crumpled. "But, go," Harper repeated, more firmly this time. Alexander watched his son trudge toward the Mercedes, shoulders slumped in defeat. The boy climbed into the back seat without another word. Alexander lingered for a moment, studying Harper. She was packing the chess set into her backpack with careful, practiced movements. Everything about her screamed poverty. The worn clothes, the careful way she handled her few possessions, the haunted look in her eyes that came from too many nights without a safe place to sleep. But those hands moved chess pieces like a maestro conducting an orchestra. Who was she? "James," Alexander said without taking his eyes off Harper. "Drive Oliver home. I'll be along shortly." The Mercedes pulled away from the curb, leaving Alexander alone with the girl. She'd finished packing and was preparing to leave, slinging her backpack over one shoulder. "Wait," Alexander said. Harper froze, one foot already off the bench. "What's your name?" She turned to face him, chin raised defiantly. "Harper." "Harper what?" "Just Harper." Alexander nodded slowly. "How long have you been playing chess with my son?" "A few weeks." Her voice was steady, but Alexander caught the slight tremor in her hands. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Harper's laugh was bitter. "Does it matter? You've already decided I'm not good enough for your precious boy." "That's not." Alexander stopped himself. That was exactly what he'd decided. "Oliver is very talented. He has a future in competitive chess. I won't have that jeopardized by distractions." "Distractions?" Harper repeated the word like it tasted bad. "Is that what you think I am?" Alexander's silence was answer enough. Harper stood up, slinging her backpack over both shoulders. "You know what's funny, Mr. Reed?" she said. "Your son is brilliant. But he plays like he's scared of making a mistake. Like every move has to be perfect or he'll disappoint someone." She took a step closer, and Alexander caught a whiff of cheap soap and unwashed clothes. "I've been teaching him to take risks, to trust his instincts, to play like he's not afraid of losing." Harper's dark eyes bored into his. "But I guess that's not what you want for him." She turned and walked away, her worn sneakers silent on the wet grass. Alexander watched her go, a strange unease settling in his stomach. Something about this didn't add up. The way she talked about chess, the depth of her understanding, the casual confidence in her voice when she discussed strategy. Homeless people didn't talk like chess masters. But then again, chess masters didn't live on the streets. Alexander pulled out his phone and speed-dialed his assistant. "Monica, I need a background check on someone. A girl, maybe 18 or 19, first name Harper. She's been spending time in Riverside Park. I want to know everything about her by end of business today." "Of course, Mr. Reed. Anything else?" Alexander's eyes tracked Harper's retreating figure until she disappeared behind a cluster of trees. "Yes, I want security footage from the park for the last month. Every camera, every angle. Send it to my home office." "Right away, sir." Alexander hung up and headed back to his car. He had a feeling this was just the beginning. The drive home passed in tense silence. Oliver stared out the window, his young face a mask of barely contained misery. Alexander found himself stealing glances at his son in the rearview mirror, noting the way the boy's shoulders curved inward, the listless way his hands lay in his lap. When had Oliver started looking so defeated? Their house loomed ahead, a sprawling Tudor mansion set back from the street behind iron gates and manicured lawns. It was the kind of home that appeared in architectural magazines, all soaring ceilings and marble floors and rooms that were more for show than living. Alexander had bought it 3 years ago, after his divorce from Oliver's mother became final. He'd thought a new start would be good for both of them. A fresh beginning in a house that wasn't haunted by the ghost of their failed marriage. But looking at it now through Oliver's eyes, Alexander wondered if it just felt like a very expensive prison. "Oliver," he said as James pulled into the circular driveway. "We need to talk." The boy nodded without lifting his eyes from his hands. They went inside, their footsteps echoing in the vast foyer. Alexander led the way to his study, a room lined floor to ceiling with books he'd bought but rarely read, dominated by a massive oak desk that had cost more than most people's cars. Oliver settled into one of the leather chairs across from the desk, looking smaller than his 11 years. "Tell me about this girl," Alexander said, settling behind his desk. "Harper." Oliver's head snapped up. She's not what you think. What do I think? That she's just some homeless person who doesn't matter. Oliver's voice was quiet but steady. That she's going to mess up my chess somehow. Alexander studied his son's face. Isn't she? No. The word exploded out of Oliver with surprising force. Dad, she's incredible. She sees things on the chessboard that I never even thought of. She makes the game fun again. Fun. When was the last time Oliver had used that word about chess? Oliver, you have a tournament next month. The Junior Metropolitan Championship. If you win that, you'll qualify for nationals. This is important. I know it's important, Oliver said. You remind me every day. The quiet accusation in his son's voice hit Alexander like a slap. Oliver, Dad, when did you last see me smile during a chess game? The question caught Alexander off guard. He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. When had he last seen Oliver smile during a chess game? That's not the point, Alexander said finally. Chess isn't about having fun. It's about winning. It's about discipline and strategy and what? Oliver's eyes blazed with sudden fire. And making you proud? And proving that all the money you spend on coaches and lessons and tournaments isn't wasted. Alexander recoiled as if he'd been slapped. That's not, isn't it? Oliver stood up, his small hands clenched into fists. Dad, I love chess. I really do. But I hate the way it feels when I play now. Like every move is being judged. Like one mistake will disappoint everyone. The raw pain in his son's voice made Alexander's chest ache. Oliver, I just want what's best for you. Harper makes it feel like chess again, Oliver said quietly. Not like a job. Not like a test. Like a game. Like something beautiful. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, watching his son's face. The boy was right. Somewhere along the way, chess had stopped being about Oliver's passion and started being about Alexander's ambitions. But that didn't change the facts. Oliver had talent. Real talent. The kind that could open doors, win scholarships, build a future. And this girl, this Harper, was a distraction he couldn't afford. Oliver, Alexander said carefully, I know you think this girl is helping you, but you don't understand the kind of dedication it takes to compete at the highest levels. Every hour you spend with her is an hour you're not spending with proper coaching. But Dad, no buts. Alexander's voice was firm. I'm hiring a new coach. Someone who can work with you every day, not just twice a week. And I want you to promise me you won't see this Harper girl again. Oliver's face went white. Dad, please. Promise me. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, Oliver nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I promise, he whispered. Alexander felt a stab of guilt at the defeat in his son's voice, but he pushed it aside. This was the right thing to do. Oliver would understand eventually. He had to. The new coach arrived 2 days later. Dr. Mikhail Petrov was exactly what Alexander had hoped for. A former grandmaster from Russia with an impressive tournament record and an even more impressive list of former students who'd gone on to international success. He was expensive, demanding, and absolutely no fun whatsoever. Perfect. Oliver endured the first lesson in stony silence, mechanically moving pieces and responding to Dr. Petrov's criticisms with barely audible acknowledgments. The old Russian coach seemed pleased with the boy's serious attitude, praising his proper respect for the classical approach. Alexander watched from the doorway, telling himself that Oliver's obvious misery was just an adjustment period. The boy would come around. He had to. But as the days passed, Oliver seemed to withdraw further into himself. He went through his daily routine, school, chess lessons, homework, dinner, like a robot. The spark that had always made him special, the joy that had first drawn Alexander to watch him play, seemed to have been extinguished completely. And worse, his game was suffering. Dr. Petrov reported that Oliver was playing too conservatively, that he seemed afraid to take necessary risks. The boy's natural tactical instincts appeared to have vanished, replaced by rigid adherence to classical principles that made his play predictable and dull. He has all the knowledge, Dr. Petrov told Alexander after the fourth lesson. But no fire, no passion. It is like teaching chess to a computer that does not wish to be programmed. Alexander found himself thinking about Harper's words. Your son plays like he's scared of making a mistake. But it was too late to second-guess himself now. Oliver would adapt. He was a Reed, and Reeds didn't give up. Except Oliver seemed to have given up anyway. On the 5th day of the new regime, Alexander returned home early from a meeting to find Oliver's room empty. According to the housekeeper, the boy had claimed he was going for a run around the neighborhood, something he'd never shown interest in before. A cold dread settled in Alexander's stomach. He went to his study and pulled up the tracking app on his phone. Oliver's location showed up as a blinking dot on the map, and Alexander's worst fears were confirmed. The dot was stationary in Riverside Park. Alexander grabbed his keys and drove to the park faster than he should have, his mind racing with a dozen different scenarios. What if Oliver was putting himself in danger? What if this Harper girl was some kind of predator who'd been grooming his son? What if? He forced himself to slow down as he pulled into the parking lot. Panicking wouldn't help anyone. The late afternoon sun was slanting through the trees as Alexander made his way along the walking path. He could hear voices ahead, Oliver's laugh mixing with a lower, feminine tone he recognized. Alexander crept closer, using the trees as cover just as he had that first morning. What he saw made his blood boil. Oliver and Harper were sitting on the same bench, the same worn chessboard between them. But this time, they weren't alone. 3 other children, kids around Oliver's age, had gathered around to watch, sitting cross-legged on the grass like they were watching a magic show. "Your move," Harper said to a girl with pigtails who was challenging Oliver. The girl bit her lip in concentration, then moved her knight. Oliver studied the position for a moment, then grinned and moved his bishop. "Check," he said cheerfully. The girl groaned dramatically, but she was smiling too. "How do you see these things so fast?" "Harper taught me to look for patterns," Oliver said. "Not just the obvious ones, but the hidden ones. The moves that don't make sense until suddenly they do." Alexander noticed something that made his chest tighten with a complex mix of pride and fury. Oliver was playing beautifully. His moves were sharp, creative, aggressive in all the best ways. He was taking risks, making sacrificial plays, thinking 3 moves ahead instead of following rote patterns. He was playing like the prodigy Alexander remembered. Again, one of the watching children called out as the game ended. "Do another one." Harper laughed, and the sound was surprisingly warm. "I think that's enough chess for today, Marcus. Your mom's probably wondering where you are." As the children dispersed with promises to return tomorrow, Harper began packing up the chess set. Oliver helped her, their movements easy and familiar. "Thank you," Oliver said quietly, "for not giving up on me. I know my dad told you to stay away." Harper's hands stilled on the chess pieces. "He's just trying to protect you." "From what? From having fun? From remembering why I loved chess in the first place." Harper was quiet for a long moment. "From someone like me," she said finally. "Someone who doesn't fit into his world." "I don't care about his world," Oliver said fiercely. "I care about chess. Real chess. The kind you showed me." Alexander stepped out from behind the tree before he could stop himself. "Oliver." His son spun around, eyes wide with guilt and defiance. Harper stood slowly, clutching the chess set to her chest like armor. "Dad, I can explain." "Can you?" Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. "Because it looks to me like you lied. It looks to me like you broke your promise." Oliver's face crumpled. "I'm sorry, but..." "No buts." Alexander's eyes flicked to Harper. "And you? I thought I made myself clear." Harper lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "You did. And yet here you are. Here I am." Her calm defiance infuriated Alexander more than tears or excuses would have. "What exactly do you think you're doing? What's your angle here?" Harper blinked, genuinely confused. "My angle? Nobody helps a stranger's kid out of the goodness of their heart. Especially not someone in your situation. So what do you want? Money? A place to stay? What's your price?" The words hung in the air like poison. Oliver gasped audibly. But Harper just looked at Alexander with something that might have been pity. "You really don't understand, do you?" she said softly. "Understand what?" "What it's like to find something you love and have it taken away from you." Harper's dark eyes were steady on his face. "What it's like to watch a kid lose his passion for something beautiful because the adults around him have turned it into a burden." She slung her backpack over her shoulder. "I don't want anything from you, Mr. Reed. I never did. I just wanted to help your son remember why he fell in love with chess in the first place." Harper started to walk away, then paused. "For what it's worth, Oliver is the most naturally gifted player I've ever seen. But talent without joy is just mechanical precision. And mechanical precision doesn't win championships. Heart does." She looked at Oliver, her expression gentle. "Take care of yourself, kiddo. And remember, Chess isn't about being perfect. It's about being brave. With that, she walked away, leaving Alexander and Oliver alone in the gathering dusk. The ride home was silent. Oliver stared out his window, tears streaming down his face, while Alexander gripped the steering wheel and tried to convince himself he'd done the right thing. But Harper's words echoed in his head. Talent without joy is just mechanical precision. And mechanical precision doesn't win championships. Heart does. The Junior Metropolitan Championship was 3 weeks away, and Oliver was falling apart. Dr. Petrov reported that the boys' play had become erratic and unfocused. During their lessons, Oliver would make brilliant moves followed immediately by inexplicable blunders. He seemed unable to concentrate, constantly checking his phone or staring out the window like he was looking for someone. Perhaps the child is overwhelmed, Dr. Petrov suggested during his daily report to Alexander. Too much pressure, yes? Sometimes young players, they crack under expectations. Alexander dismissed the coach's concerns, but privately he was worried. Oliver barely spoke during dinner anymore, picking at his food and answering questions with monosyllables. His teachers had started calling about declining grades and unusual behavior in class. The boy was miserable, and Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that it was his fault. Still, he told himself it would pass. Oliver just needed time to adjust to his new routine. Once he settled into working with Dr. Petrov, his natural talent would reassert itself. But as the days ticked by, things only got worse. Alexander hired a private investigator to conduct a more thorough background check on Harper, hoping to find something, anything, that would justify his decision to keep her away from Oliver. What he found instead only deepened his confusion. Harper Chun, 19 years old, former ward of the state who'd aged out of the foster system with no family and no support network. She'd been living in shelters and on the streets for the past 8 months, moving from place to place, trying to stay invisible. But here was the part that didn't make sense. She'd been a nationally ranked chess player as a teenager. Multiple tournament wins, including a state championship at age 16. She'd been coached by some of the best instructors in the country, had scholarship offers from several universities. Then, at 17, she'd simply vanished from the chess world. No explanation, no forwarding address. She'd walked away from everything. Alexander stared at the investigator's report, trying to piece together the story. What would make a gifted teenage chess player abandon her future and end up homeless? The answers, when they came, made his stomach churn. Harper's foster father had been arrested for embezzlement when she was 17. The man had been using the money meant for Harper's chess training and tournament fees to fund his gambling addiction. When the house of cards collapsed, Harper found herself not only homeless but also branded as an accomplice in the press coverage, despite having no knowledge of the crimes. The chess community, so quick to embrace her when she was winning, turned its back just as quickly when scandal touched her name. Sponsorships vanished. Scholarship offers were quietly withdrawn. Tournament invitations dried up. She tried to rebuild, but the damage was done. With no money for training or tournament fees, and no family to fall back on, she'd been forced to choose between survival and chess. She'd chosen survival. Alexander closed the file and sat back in his chair, a sick feeling spreading through his chest. This girl, this homeless girl he'd dismissed as a distraction, had sacrificed everything for the game his son was learning to hate. And now she was living on the streets while Oliver, who had every advantage money could buy, was slowly losing his love for the very thing she'd given up everything to pursue. The irony was unbearable. Alexander was still mulling over the report when his phone buzzed with a text from Oliver's school. "Mr. Reed, please call at your earliest convenience. We need to discuss Oliver's behavior today." The call was brief and disturbing. Oliver had gotten into a fight during lunch, something that had never happened before. According to his teacher, another student had made a comment about chess nerds, and Oliver had completely lost control, throwing the first punch in what became a brief but intense scuffle. "This is very unlike Oliver," the teacher said. "He's usually such a gentle, well-behaved child. Has there been any unusual stress at home recently?" Alexander assured the teacher that everything was fine, but he knew it wasn't true. Oliver was unraveling, and Alexander had no idea how to stop it. That evening, he found his son in his room, staring at a chess set but not playing. The pieces were arranged in the starting position, but Oliver was just sitting there, motionless. "Oliver?" What are you doing?" His son looked up, and Alexander was shocked by the emptiness in the boy's eyes. "I was trying to remember," Oliver said quietly. "Remember what?" "What it felt like. Before." Oliver's voice was barely above a whisper. "When chess was fun. When I didn't have to think about disappointing you with every move." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. "Oliver, you don't disappoint me. Don't I?" Oliver stood up, his small fists clenched at his sides. "Dad, when was the last time you said you were proud of me? Not proud of my ranking, or my tournament wins, or my rating points. Proud of me." Alexander opened his mouth, then closed it. "When was the last time he'd done that? You want to know why I got in a fight today?" Oliver continued, tears streaming down his face. "Because Jimmy Morrison said that chess was stupid and that chess players were weird loners who couldn't make real friends. And I realized he was right. I am a weird loner now. I used to love chess, and now I hate it. I used to have friends, and now I have coaches and trainers and tutors who all just want me to be better than I was yesterday." Oliver wiped his nose on his sleeve, looking younger than his 11 years. "Harper was the first person in months who made chess feel like a game instead of a job. She made me remember why I fell in love with it in the first place. And you took that away from me." The quiet accusation in his son's voice broke something inside Alexander's chest. "And now," Oliver said, his voice barely audible, "I don't know if I can find my way back to loving it again." Alexander watched his son collapse back onto his bed, small shoulders shaking with silent sobs, and realized that he'd failed as a father in the most fundamental way possible. He'd been so focused on protecting Oliver's future that he'd forgotten to protect Oliver's present. So worried about turning his son into a champion that he'd forgotten his son was still just a child. A child who needed joy more than he needed victory. Alexander left Oliver's room and went to his study, pulling out the investigator's report on Harper. He stared at her photograph, a school picture from when she was 16, before everything fell apart. She looked younger then, hopeful, her eyes bright with ambition and dreams. What would it take to convince her to help Oliver again? And more importantly, what would it take to convince Alexander himself that he deserved a second chance to get this right? Alexander found Harper 3 days later. It took considerable effort and resources, private investigators, security camera analysis, interviews with shelter workers and street vendors who might have seen her. But eventually, the trail led to a small public library in the city's downtown district, where she apparently spent her days when the weather was too harsh for the park. Alexander pushed through the library's heavy glass doors and found her in the chess section, sitting cross-legged on the floor between two towering bookshelves. She had a battered chess manual open in her lap and was working through problems on a small magnetic set. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and her expression immediately went guarded. "Mr. Reed." Her voice was carefully neutral. "If you're here to tell me to stay away from your son again, you're wasting your time. I haven't seen Oliver since that day in the park." Alexander cleared his throat, suddenly feeling awkward. The library was quiet except for the soft sound of turning pages and muted conversations. A few patrons had looked up at his entrance. His expensive suit stood out like a beacon in the humble surroundings. "I'm not here about that," he said. "I'm here to apologize." Harper blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Apologize? May I sit?" She gestured to the floor beside her, and Alexander carefully lowered himself onto the worn carpet, trying not to think about what his tailor would say about his $1,000 suit. "I had you investigated," Alexander said without preamble. Harper's face went pale. "I see. I know about your foster father. About what happened to your chess career. About why you're living on the streets." Harper closed the chess manual with a soft snap and hugged it to her chest. And I realize I misjudged you. Badly." They sat in silence for a moment. Around them, the library hummed with quiet activity, students studying, elderly patrons reading newspapers, children whispering over picture books. "Harper," Alexander said carefully, "my son is falling apart." Her head snapped up. "What do you mean?" Alexander told her everything. The fight at school, the declining grades, the tears in Oliver's room. The way chess had become a burden instead of a joy. The growing distance between father and son that Alexander didn't know how to bridge. "He misses you," Alexander said finally. "And I think I was wrong to keep you away from him." Harper was quiet for a long time, staring down at the chess manual in her lap. "You thought I was after your money," she said finally. "Yes. You thought I would corrupt him somehow. Teach him bad habits. Yes. You thought a homeless girl couldn't possibly have anything valuable to offer your privileged son. Alexander winced. Yes. Harper looked up at him then, and her dark eyes were sad but not angry. You know what the funny thing is, Mr. Reed? You were right about one thing. I am dangerous to Oliver. What do you mean? I'm dangerous because I remember what chess used to feel like before it became about rankings and ratings and scholarships and making parents proud. Harper's voice was soft but steady. I'm dangerous because I know that the best players aren't the ones who never lose. They're the ones who aren't afraid to lose. She set the chess manual aside and leaned back against the bookshelf. Your son has more natural talent than I've ever seen. But he's been taught to play it safe, to follow patterns, to never take risks that might lead to failure. And that's going to limit him more than any homeless girl ever could. Alexander absorbed this, thinking about Oliver's mechanical play in recent weeks, the way he'd started second-guessing every move. What would you do, he asked, if you were in my position? Harper was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'd ask myself what I really want for my son. Do I want him to be a champion? Or do I want him to be happy? Can't he be both? Maybe. But not if you keep prioritizing the championship over the happiness. Harper met his eyes. The thing is, Mr. Reed, truly great players, the ones who become legends, they're not driven by fear of disappointing their parents. They're driven by love of the game. And you can't manufacture that love. You can only nurture it or destroy it. Alexander thought about the joy on Oliver's face that first day in the park, the way his son's eyes had lit up when Harper showed him a new tactical pattern. When was the last time Oliver had looked that happy during a chess lesson with Dr. Petrov? Would you? Alexander started, then stopped. This was harder than he'd expected. Would you consider working with Oliver again? Officially, I mean. I'd pay you, of course. Whatever rate you think is fair. Harper stared at him for a long moment. You want to hire me as Oliver's chess coach? I want to hire you to help my son fall in love with chess again. Alexander's voice was quiet but steady. Money is no object. I'll pay for an apartment, living expenses, whatever you need. I just want my son to be happy. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. I'm not a certified coach, Harper said finally. I don't have credentials or qualifications or any of the things you probably look for in Oliver's instructors. You have something better, Alexander replied. You have the ability to make him smile when he plays. Harper was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I've been living on the streets for 8 months, Mr. Reed. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? How it changes you? Alexander shook his head. It makes you suspicious of kindness. It makes you assume that everyone wants something from you, that every offer of help comes with strings attached. Harper looked up at him. How do I know this isn't just another way to control Oliver? How do I know you won't change your mind again the moment things don't go exactly the way you want them to? The question was fair, and Alexander didn't have an easy answer. You don't, he said finally. I can't prove my intentions to you any more than you could prove yours to me. But I can tell you this. I've spent the last 3 weeks watching my son lose his love for the thing that used to make him happiest. And I've realized that all the trophies and rankings in the world don't mean anything if he's miserable. He pulled out his phone and showed Harper a video he'd taken 2 days earlier, Oliver practicing with Dr. Petrov. In the footage, Oliver moved pieces like he was afraid of them, his face tense with concentration and anxiety. There was no joy, no spark of creativity, no hint of the brilliant player he'd once been. That's not my son, Alexander said. That's what I've turned him into. And I need your help to bring the real Oliver back. Harper watched the video, her expression unreadable. When it ended, she was quiet for a long moment. If I agree to this, she said finally, I have conditions. Name them. First, Oliver's happiness comes before his ranking. Always. If I think the pressure is getting to him, we back off, no questions asked. Alexander nodded. Agreed. Second, I do this my way. No interference from Dr. Petrov or any other coaches. Oliver works with me alone, or this doesn't work at all. Alexander hesitated. Dr. Petrov was expensive, highly credentialed, but he was also turning Oliver into a chess robot. Agreed. Third, if Oliver decides he doesn't want to play competitively anymore, you respect that decision. Chess should be something he chooses, not something he's forced into. This was harder. Alexander had invested so much in Oliver's chess career, had such high hopes. But looking at Harper's determined face, thinking about Oliver's tears, he found himself nodding again. Agreed. Harper studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read his sincerity. Finally, she said, "Okay, I'll help Oliver. But Mr. Reed, if you ever make him choose between chess and happiness again, I'm gone. And I won't come back." Understood. Harper stood up, brushing dust off her jeans. When do we start? The reunion between Harper and Oliver was everything Alexander had hoped for and more. They met at the house the next afternoon. Alexander had spent the morning making arrangements, firing Dr. Petrov, who took the news with characteristic Russian stoicism, setting Harper up with a small apartment near the park, advancing her enough money for decent clothes and meals. When Oliver came home from school and found Harper waiting in the living room, his face went through a dozen emotions in rapid succession: disbelief, joy, confusion, hope. "Harper," he whispered, as if saying her name too loud might make her disappear. "Hey, kiddo." Harper's smile was soft and genuine. "Want to play some chess?" Oliver looked back and forth between Harper and his father, clearly not trusting this sudden reversal of fortune. "It's okay," Alexander said. "Harper is going to be your new chess coach, if you want her to be." The transformation in Oliver's face was immediate and breathtaking. The hollow, defeated expression vanished, replaced by the bright-eyed enthusiasm Alexander remembered from months ago. "Really? You mean it? She can really stay?" "She can really stay," Alexander confirmed. Oliver launched himself at Harper, wrapping his arms around her waist in a fierce hug. Harper looked surprised for a moment, then gently hugged him back. "I missed you," Oliver said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "I missed you too," Harper replied, and Alexander was surprised to hear genuine emotion in her voice. They set up the chessboard in the living room, not the expensive tournament set Alexander had bought, but Harper's worn wooden pieces that had seen countless games. Oliver's hands moved over them like he was greeting old friends. "Okay," Harper said, settling across from him. "Before we start, I want you to forget everything you've learned in the past few weeks. All those rigid rules and classical patterns and perfect moves. Can you do that?" Oliver nodded eagerly. "Good. Now, I want you to tell me something. Why do you love chess?" The question seemed to catch Oliver off guard. He opened his mouth, then closed it, thinking. I used to love it because it was like solving puzzles," he said slowly. "But puzzles where I got to be creative, where I could find solutions nobody else saw. Used to love it." Harper's voice was gentle. "What about now?" Oliver's face fell. "Now it feels like I'm always being tested. Like every game is a chance to fail." Harper nodded. "That's what I thought. Oliver, chess isn't about not failing. Chess is about failing beautifully, learning from it, and getting better. The best players in the world lose games all the time. You know what makes them great?" Oliver shook his head. "They're not afraid to try things that might not work. They take risks. They sacrifice pieces to create opportunities. They play with their hearts, not just their heads." Harper moved a pawn forward, starting a new game. "So today, I want you to play like you used to. Don't worry about making the right move. Make the move that excites you." Alexander watched from across the room, pretending to read a magazine, but really observing every moment of the interaction. Within minutes, he could see the change in Oliver. The boy's shoulders relaxed. His movements became more fluid, more confident. And for the first time in weeks, Oliver was smiling while he played chess. The game lasted nearly an hour, full of tactical complications and creative sacrifices that made Alexander's head spin. Harper guided Oliver gently, asking questions rather than giving commands, helping him see possibilities rather than telling him what to do. "What if you moved your knight there?" she'd suggest. "What would that open up for you? Or, your opponent just weakened their king position. How might you take advantage of that?" It wasn't traditional coaching. It was more like a conversation between two people who both loved the same beautiful, complex game. When Oliver finally achieved checkmate with a brilliant queen sacrifice, he literally bounced in his chair with excitement. "Did you see that, Dad?" he called across the room. "Did you see that combination?" Alexander lowered his magazine, smiling at his son's enthusiasm. "I saw it. That was incredible, Oliver." And it was incredible. Not just the chess, though the combination had been genuinely brilliant, but the joy on Oliver's face. The pure, uncomplicated happiness of a child doing something he loved. How had Alexander forgotten how important that was? Over the following weeks, Alexander watched his son transform back into the boy he'd been before the pressure and expectations had crushed his spirit. Harper worked with Oliver every day after school, sometimes at the house, sometimes at the park, occasionally at the library where Alexander had found her. She never used the word lesson. They were always just playing chess, or working on puzzles, or exploring ideas. But the results spoke for themselves. Oliver's play became sharp and creative again. He started taking calculated risks, making the kind of brilliant sacrificial moves that had first marked him as a prodigy. His tactical vision improved dramatically, and more importantly, his love for the game returned in full force. Alexander found himself looking forward to their sessions, often working from home just so he could observe. Harper had an unconventional but effective teaching style. Instead of drilling Oliver on memorized openings, she'd set up interesting middle game positions and ask him to find the best continuation. Instead of making him study endgame theory, she'd create puzzles that taught the same concepts through discovery and play. The best way to learn chess, Harper explained to Alexander one evening, is to fall in love with chess positions. Once you love the patterns, you'll remember them forever. But if you just memorize them without understanding their beauty, you'll forget them the moment you're under pressure. Alexander was starting to understand that Harper's approach to chess was fundamentally different from every coach Oliver had worked with before. Where the others had focused on technique and theory, Harper focused on passion and intuition. Where they had emphasized avoiding mistakes, she emphasized creating opportunities. And it was working. Oliver's school reported that his grades were improving, his attitude was better, and he seemed happier overall. The boy who had been withdrawn and moody was becoming talkative and energetic again, full of stories about interesting positions Harper had shown him or creative tactics they'd discovered together. But the real test would come soon. The Junior Metropolitan Championship was just 2 weeks away. Alexander found himself caught between hope and anxiety. Oliver was playing better than he had in months, but he was also playing in a completely different style than before. Would his new approach translate to tournament success? Or would the classical players with their memorized openings and rigid technique overwhelm his creative but unconventional play? He's ready, Harper assured Alexander when he voiced these concerns. Trust me, Oliver isn't just playing better, he's playing like himself again. And when a player is truly being himself, that's when the magic happens. Alexander hoped she was right. Because if she wasn't, if Oliver failed spectacularly at the tournament, Alexander wasn't sure his son would ever recover his love for the game, or his trust in his father. The morning of the Junior Metropolitan Championship dawned gray and drizzly, matching Alexander's mood perfectly. He'd barely slept, his mind churning with doubts and second thoughts. What if he'd made a mistake? What if Harper's unconventional methods had prepared Oliver for creative play, but left him vulnerable to the solid, technical approach most tournament players used? Oliver, by contrast, seemed completely relaxed. He ate a normal breakfast, chatted easily with Harper about a chess book he'd been reading, and showed none of the pre-tournament nerves that usually had him throwing up in the bathroom. "You feeling okay?" Alexander asked as they prepared to leave for the tournament venue. "I feel great, Dad." Oliver's smile was genuine and confident. "I can't wait to play." When was the last time Oliver had said he couldn't wait to play in a tournament? The competition was being held at a hotel conference center downtown, the kind of sterile, fluorescent-lit space that Alexander associated with corporate meetings and motivational seminars. Tables were arranged in precise rows, each equipped with a chess set and clock. Parents clustered along the walls, whispering anxiously about their children's chances. Alexander recognized several faces from previous tournaments. The usual suspects, kids who'd been competing at this level for years. There was Marcus Chun, no relation to Harper, a serious 12-year-old who played the Caro-Kann defense with computer-like precision. Sarah Williams, a 10-year-old prodigy who'd been featured in Chess Monthly magazine. David Kim, Oliver's longtime rival who'd beaten him in their last 3 encounters. These were Oliver's opponents. Children who'd been drilled in classical technique by grandmaster coaches, who'd memorized thousands of opening variations, who approached chess like a science rather than an art. Could Oliver's renewed creativity compete with that level of technical preparation? "Remember," Harper said quietly as Oliver prepared for his first game, "chess is about finding beautiful solutions to complex problems. Don't worry about what your opponent expects you to do. Just find the most beautiful move on the board." Oliver nodded, looking surprisingly calm for an 11-year-old about to face serious competition. His first opponent was a boy Alexander didn't recognize, a stocky 10-year-old with thick glasses who set up his pieces with methodical precision. The kind of player who probably had every major opening memorized. The game began conventionally enough. Oliver's opponent played the standard king's pawn opening, and Oliver responded with the Sicilian defense, a sharp, tactical choice that immediately signaled his aggressive intentions. But by move 8, something interesting was happening. Instead of following the main theoretical lines, Oliver was improvising, creating complications that clearly weren't in his opponent's repertoire. The other boy began consuming time on his clock, trying to calculate through unfamiliar positions while Oliver played quickly and confidently. Alexander found himself holding his breath as Oliver sacrificed a pawn for unclear compensation, the kind of move that would have horrified Dr. Petrov, but that Harper had taught him to see as an investment in long-term attacking chances. It worked. Faced with mounting pressure and a clock that was ticking down too quickly, Oliver's opponent made a fatal error on move 23. Oliver pounced immediately, launching a tactical sequence that ended in mate in 4 moves. The entire game had lasted less than an hour. Oliver's opponent looked stunned, clearly unable to understand how his careful, theoretical approach had been overwhelmed so quickly. Oliver shook hands politely, then walked over to where Alexander and Harper were waiting. "How do you feel?" Harper asked. "Like I'm just getting started," Oliver replied with a grin. Game 2 was against Sarah Williams, the 10-year-old prodigy. This was a much more serious test. Sarah was known for her solid positional play and her ability to convert small advantages into wins. But again, Oliver's approach seemed to catch his opponent off guard. Instead of trying to outcalculate her in complex tactical positions, he steered the game toward creative strategic imbalances, the kind of positions where intuition mattered more than memorized patterns. The game was longer and more complex than his first, but Oliver maintained his confidence throughout. He took reasonable risks, made creative pawn sacrifices to open lines for his pieces, and generally played the kind of inspired chess that Alexander remembered from the old days. When Sarah finally resigned on move 41, shaking her head in bewilderment at the unorthodox but effective strategy Oliver had employed, Alexander felt a surge of pride unlike anything he'd experienced in months. This was his son. This was the brilliant, creative player Oliver had always been, before Alexander had tried to turn him into something else. Oliver's third game was against David Kim, his longtime rival. David was a year older than Oliver and had always relied on superior preparation and tactical calculation to defeat him. Their head-to-head record heavily favored David. But this Oliver was different from the boy David had beaten before. This Oliver was playing with joy and creativity instead of fear and calculation. When David tried to steer the game into the kind of complex theoretical variation where his superior preparation would show, Oliver simply ignored the theory and played a shocking piece sacrifice that turned the position into pure chaos. David, clearly flustered by the unexpected turn of events, made several inaccurate moves trying to refute Oliver's sacrifice. But Oliver had calculated further than David realized, and his seemingly reckless attack suddenly became a devastating offensive that David couldn't survive. When David's king finally fell on move 36, the boy looked genuinely shocked. He'd never lost to Oliver before, and certainly not in such a dramatic fashion. "Good game," David said as they shook hands, but his voice was hollow with disbelief. Oliver had won 3 games out of 3, and he was doing it with a style that was uniquely his own, creative, aggressive, fearless. Everything Alexander had tried to coach out of him, Harper had brought back. As the day progressed, Oliver continued to dominate. His opponents, prepared for traditional chess theory, seemed unable to cope with his unconventional but brilliant approach. Game after game ended the same way, Oliver's creativity overwhelming his opponent's technical precision. By the end of the tournament, Oliver had won all 7 of his games, clinching the championship by a full point over his nearest competitor. But more importantly than the trophy or the qualification for nationals, Oliver had rediscovered his love for chess. Alexander watched his son accept the first-place medal with a smile that lit up the entire room and realized that this joy, this passion, was worth more than any ranking or rating could ever be. "Thank you," Alexander said to Harper as they watched Oliver pose for pictures with his trophy. Harper shook her head. I didn't win those games. Oliver did. I just reminded him that chess is supposed to be fun. Alexander looked at his son, truly looked at him, and saw a confident, happy child who was proud of his achievement but not defined by it. Who loved chess not because he was supposed to, but because he genuinely found it beautiful and exciting. That was the boy Alexander had been trying so hard to protect that he'd almost destroyed him in the process. Harper, Alexander said quietly, there's something I need to tell you. She looked at him curiously. When I first saw you with Oliver in the park, I thought you were going to hurt him somehow. I thought you were a threat to his future. Harper nodded. I know, but I was wrong. You weren't the threat to Oliver's future. Alexander's voice was heavy with realization and regret. I was. Harper's expression softened. Mr. Reed. No, let me say this. I spent so much time trying to turn Oliver into the chess player I thought he should be that I almost made him hate the game he loved. You saved him from that. You saved him from me. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Oliver laugh with some of the other competitors, his trophy tucked under one arm. He's going to be incredible, Harper said finally. Not because of his ranking or his rating, but because he plays with his whole heart. That's rarer than you might think. Alexander nodded, understanding her meaning completely. In trying to make Oliver perfect, he'd almost made him ordinary. Harper had helped him find his way back to being extraordinary. The celebration dinner that night was the happiest family meal Alexander could remember in years. They went to Oliver's favorite restaurant, a casual Italian place where the waiters knew his name and brought him extra breadsticks without being asked. Oliver talked animatedly about his games, replaying key moments and explaining the tactical ideas Harper had taught him. In the game against David, remember when I sacrificed my knight? Oliver said between bites of spaghetti. Harper taught me that sometimes you have to give up material to create something beautiful. Dad, you should have seen his face when he realized what was happening. Alexander laughed, caught up in his son's enthusiasm. I did see his face. I thought he was going to faint. The thing is, Oliver continued, turning to Harper, it wasn't just about winning. It was about finding the most interesting move in every position. The move that created the most beautiful possibilities. Harper smiled. That's what chess is really about, kiddo. Not avoiding mistakes, but creating beauty. Alexander watched this exchange with a mixture of gratitude and wonder. Harper had given Oliver something no expensive coach or rigorous training program could provide. She'd given him back his love for the game. As they walked to the car after dinner, Oliver tugging on Harper's hand to show her something in a shop window, Alexander found himself thinking about the future differently than he had in months. There would be other tournaments, other challenges. Oliver would face setbacks and losses, moments of doubt and frustration. But now Alexander knew that those obstacles wouldn't break his son, because Oliver was playing from a place of strength, his genuine passion for chess, rather than from fear of disappointing others. Dad, Oliver said as they reached the car, can Harper come to nationals with us? If I qualify, I mean. Alexander looked at Harper, who was studying her shoes with sudden shyness. If she wants to, Alexander said. But Oliver, you already qualified. You won today, remember? Oliver's face lit up like a Christmas tree. I did, didn't I? Harper laughed. You sure did, champ. And yes, I'd love to come to nationals with you. If your dad doesn't mind, that is. I don't mind at all, Alexander said, and meant it completely. As they drove home through the quiet city streets, Alexander caught Oliver's eye in the rearview mirror. I'm proud of you, he said simply. For winning? Oliver asked. For being yourself, Alexander replied. For playing with joy and creativity and heart. For reminding your old man what chess is really supposed to be about. Oliver beamed. Thanks, Dad. I love you too. In that moment, Alexander realized that Harper had given him something as valuable as what she'd given Oliver. She'd helped him remember what it meant to be a father. Not a manager or a coach or a critic, but someone whose job was to nurture and support and celebrate his child's authentic self. That was a lesson worth more than any championship trophy. 6 months later, Alexander stood in another tournament hall, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. The National Junior Chess Championship was held in a grand ballroom at a luxury resort, with professional lighting and live streaming for the chess community to watch online. This was the big leagues, the best young players from across the country competing for titles that could change their lives. Oliver had made it to the final round, one win away from becoming the national champion in his age group. His opponent was a 13-year-old from California who'd been playing tournament chess since he was 5 and had never lost a game at the national level. The pressure should have been overwhelming. Alexander remembered other tournaments where Oliver had frozen up under much less significant circumstances, playing scared and making uncharacteristic errors when the stakes got high. But this Oliver was different. This Oliver sat calmly at his board, studying the position with the kind of focused intensity that came from genuine love of the game rather than fear of failure. When he made his moves, they were decisive and creative, showing no trace of the anxiety that used to plague his play in important games. "He's not nervous at all," Alexander murmured to Harper, who was standing beside him in the spectator area. "Why would he be?" Harper replied quietly. "He's not playing for you, or for me, or for anyone else. He's playing because he loves chess and he wants to find the most beautiful moves possible. That's the only pressure that matters." On the board, Oliver was indeed finding beautiful moves. Faced with his opponent's solid, technical approach, Oliver had steered the game into the kind of complex strategic position where his creativity and tactical vision gave him a clear advantage. His pieces worked together harmoniously, creating threats that his opponent couldn't quite handle. Alexander watched his son play with a mixture of pride and amazement. This wasn't just good chess. This was inspired chess, the kind of performance that came from a player operating at the peak of his abilities while maintaining complete joy in what he was doing. When Oliver's opponent finally resigned on move 42, unable to find adequate defense against Oliver's mounting attack, the room erupted in applause. Oliver had done it. He was the new national junior chess champion. But what Alexander remembered most about that moment wasn't the trophy presentation or the photographers or the congratulations from other parents. What he remembered was the pure, unfiltered happiness on Oliver's face as he shook hands with his opponent, the way he immediately looked around the room to find Alexander and Harper, the excitement in his voice when he ran over to share the moment with them. "Did you see it, Dad? Did you see that queen sacrifice on move 38? Harper, remember when you taught me about using the initiative to create tactical opportunities? That's exactly what happened." Alexander hugged his son tightly, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "I saw it, Oliver. It was brilliant. I'm so proud of you." Later that evening, at the awards ceremony, Alexander listened as Oliver was called to the podium to receive his trophy. The announcer read an impressive list of accomplishments. Youngest winner in the tournament's history, highest rating for his age group, undefeated record over the past 6 months. But as Alexander watched his son accept the award with dignity and grace, he realized that none of those external achievements mattered as much as the simple fact that Oliver was happy. Genuinely, completely, authentically happy. That was the real victory. After the ceremony, as they prepared to leave the resort, Harper pulled Alexander aside for a private conversation. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her expression serious. Alexander felt a flutter of anxiety. "What is it?" "I've been accepted to college," Harper said. "Full chess scholarship. I start in the fall." Alexander's first emotion was joy. Harper deserved this opportunity, deserved a chance to reclaim the future that had been stolen from her years ago. But that joy was quickly followed by concern. "That's wonderful, Harper. You deserve this. But what about Oliver?" Harper smiled. "Oliver doesn't need me anymore, Mr. Reed. He's found his love for chess again, and that's something no one can take away from him. He has the best coach he's ever going to need." "Who?" "Himself. His own passion and creativity and joy in the game. As long as he keeps playing from the heart instead of from fear, he'll be fine." Alexander absorbed this, recognizing the truth in her words. Over the past months, Oliver had indeed become more independent as a player, relying more on his own instincts and less on external guidance. Harper had taught him to trust himself, and that was a lesson that would last a lifetime. "Will you stay in touch?" Alexander asked. "Oliver's going to miss you terribly." "Of course. But Mr. Reed," "Alexander, this is important. Don't try to replace me with another coach right away. Let Oliver play for a while without constant instruction. Let him explore the game on his own terms. That's how he'll develop into the player he's meant to be." Alexander nodded, understanding her meaning. Harper hadn't just been Oliver's chess teacher. She'd been his guide back to authentic self-expression. Now it was time to trust that the foundation she'd helped rebuild would be strong enough to support Oliver's continued growth. That night, as they flew home with Oliver's championship trophy, Alexander reflected on how much had changed over the past year. He'd started out thinking he was protecting his son's chess future by keeping Harper away from him. Instead, he nearly destroyed that future by turning chess into a source of anxiety and pressure rather than joy. Harper had saved them both, Oliver from losing his love for the game, and Alexander from losing his son. But perhaps most importantly, she'd taught them both a lesson that extended far beyond chess. Authentic success comes from pursuing what you love with passion and creativity, not from trying to meet other people's expectations. As the plane carried them home through the night sky, Oliver asleep in his seat with his trophy clutched against his chest, Alexander made a silent promise to himself and to his son. He would never again let external pressure override Oliver's internal joy. He would never again mistake his own fears and ambitions for what was best for his child. And he would never again underestimate the power of love and passion to overcome any obstacle. Harper had taught him that the most important victories aren't the ones that get recorded in rating systems or trophy cases. They're the ones that happen in the human heart, when a person discovers or rediscovers what makes them truly happy. And sometimes, those victories come from the most unexpected sources. Sometimes they come from a homeless girl with holes in her shoes and wisdom in her eyes, who understands that chess, like life, is not about avoiding mistakes, but about creating something beautiful. Epilogue. 5 years later, Alexander stood in another tournament hall, but this time he was just a spectator. Oliver, now 16 and ranked among the top junior players in the world, no longer needed his father hovering nearby during competitions. He played with complete confidence and independence, his style instantly recognizable to anyone who understood chess. Creative, aggressive, fearless. But what Alexander loved most about watching his son play wasn't the brilliant tactics or the impressive victories. It was the smile that still played at Oliver's lips during complex positions, the evident joy he took in finding unexpected solutions to difficult problems. Chess had remained what Harper had helped it become, a source of happiness rather than stress, a form of creative expression rather than a burden of expectations. Harper herself had graduated college with honors and was now pursuing her master's degree while coaching at a community center, working with kids from disadvantaged backgrounds who reminded Alexander of where she'd come from. She still kept in touch with Oliver, offering encouragement before important tournaments and celebrating his victories from afar. Alexander had learned to let their relationship unfold naturally, without interference or management. Some lessons, he discovered, you only get to learn once. As Oliver finished his game, another victory, achieved with his characteristic blend of calculation and intuition, Alexander felt a familiar surge of pride. Not pride in the result, but pride in the young man his son had become. Confident without being arrogant, competitive without being ruthless, passionate without being obsessed. Oliver caught his eye across the room and grinned, giving him a small wave before turning to analyze the game with his opponent. In that simple gesture, Alexander saw everything he'd hoped for when he'd first dreamed of his son's chess career: joy, fulfillment, authentic success. It had taken a homeless girl to teach a billionaire father the most valuable lesson of all, that the best things in life can't be bought, managed, or controlled. They can only be nurtured, protected, and celebrated. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they can be saved by someone who understands their true value better than you do. The game of chess would always be a part of Oliver's life. But now it was the right part, not a burden or a test, but a joy and a gift. That was worth more than any championship in the world. If you made it to the end, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. It truly means the world to us. See you in the next one.